Ladies and gentlemen, hello again, and welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name's Graham, this is X-Plane 11, and today we're going to go gliding. Just something to fill in some spare time. This is a modified version of the ASK21 Glider, a very popular two-seat trainer, and it's got a very good instrument fit on this model. It's fairly well modelled, fairly realistic, and it flies really nicely. So let's get it set up and ready to go. We can set the weight in the aircraft here, make sure it's set to imperial or metric as you prefer, and then we'll go through the standard glider checks that are used in UK gliding clubs. So we check the controls for full and free movement. You also check with an outside observer that your controls are moving in the correct sense. You do that because the controls are hooked up whenever you take the glider out of the trailer, so always check the controls work in the proper sense. Make sure they've been hooked up correctly. Controls are done. Ballast we've already looked at. We've got a weight of 190 pounds in the front, no rear seat pilot, that's fine. Straps, not relevant. Instruments, well, let's close the canopy. We'll bring the instruments on. Battery, avionics, and set to the QNH. Controls, ballast, straps, instruments, flaps are not fitted to this aircraft. Trim is set. Canopy, closed and locked, and air brakes, you can see the air brakes out on the wing, closed and locked. CBSIFTCB, we call it. Now I'm using a plug-in on this flight to replicate the winch launch. It's called X-Winch. It's really very useful. It provides this extra scenery around the launch point. Glider launch points, there's always some old bus and some picnic tables there. And it also affects how the winch launch happens. It makes it a little bit more realistic. So we'll tell the ground person here to hook us up.
Cable is on and secure. You have a weak link.
Excellent. We'll talk about the weak link as we get airborne.
All clear above, behind, and in front.
I'm just going to apply some slight forward pressure.
All out.
There we go. Make sure we don't rear up. We'll get airborne. And rotate into the climb, looking for about 45 degrees. Speed between 50 and 60 knots. Need to turn that video down, it's very loud. Just lower the nose, or let the nose come down, and release the cable. And let's trim it. Let's turn that video down just now. Excellent. Clear to the left, let's go back, see if we can find the hill. So two things about the glider. Firstly, we've got an audio vario, as you heard on the takeoff. I need to remember to turn that volume down before I fly the next time. And secondly, you can see the yaw string on the canopy ahead of us. The yaw string is just the same as the turn and slip ball that you can see in the centre of the aircraft, but it's a lot more sensitive for glider flying. So gliders have got a fair amount of adverse yaw. When you put aileron input in, the nose goes the other way. You can see it kind of rolling to left, nose goes right, and vice versa. So it's important that you always coordinate the turn with the rudder. That's why the yaw string up here is very helpful. If you want to recreate this flight, I'll put the weather conditions and links to all the aircraft and the plugins that are being used in the video description. But downwind here, we're at about 1100 feet. So as I said, it's got a very good instrument fit on this aircraft. It's very nicely modelled. What I'm trying to do now is get up to about 1500 feet, and then hopefully we'll be able to run across the inlet here, try and get up to about 4,500 feet or so. But I'll need to work fairly hard initially. I'm going to turn onto this hill just now. We'll always make turns away from the ridge, never turn towards the ridge. A common rule in gliding. That change in tone tells me that the aircraft is going up. We can see it on the electronic vario here as well. And what we're looking for is to maximize the climb. So we're clear on the left. And notice how we always have to coordinate that turn. Clear on the right even. Don't know my left from my right today. Must be a Sunday. Get back onto the ridge, try and get some more lift. There we go. So the variometer, the digital instrument here, it's a computerized vario. It's not simply a vertical speed indicator, it's aware of airspeed as well. Obviously, you know, in any aircraft you can pull the nose up and you'll climb, but you'll also lose airspeed, and that's not very useful for a glider. So the variometer is working in what's called a total energy mode. You can see it showing TE on this mode here. So it's fed not only with the same static information that a normal vertical speed indicator would have, but it also has an airspeed feed on it, almost like a reverse airspeed feed, so that as the aircraft slows down, if it climbs and slows down, it won't show a positive energy gain. So any inputs you put on the stick for up and down, it will effectively be cancelled out on the vario. It's much more useful for a glider pilot to know how they're actually performing, rather than simply going up or down. If you're going up because you've pulled back, that's not very useful. Not very useful to know. You see there's a second vario here. This one's in the netto mode at the moment. That's almost exactly the same information as the total energy vario, except it's aware of the glider's performance. So the instrument itself is built to subtract the aircraft's performance. So what that's showing you is what the air mass is doing. At the moment I'm climbing at around about 1 knot, but the air mass is climbing at 2.5 knots. So it's just another way of analysing how the environment is affecting your flight. I think we're done there. Clear to the left. That wasn't very well coordinated. It's very hard to get coordination right in the sim. Obviously when you're flying for real, it's very easy, because when the apparent gravity is straight down through your body, you know that you're coordinated. It's just like riding a bike in a corner, in a turn. Let's get one more little bit of lift here, and then we'll head along to the east. Excellent, about 1500 feet should do it. Now what would be really useful is if I had a moving map as well, and then we could have a look at the contours as we're flying along. In X-Plane it is able to simulate thermal lift, but it's not very good for glider pilots because thermals are usually marked by cumulus clouds. You would deliberately fly towards a cumulus cloud or underneath a cumulus cloud to try and find the lift, whereas in X-Plane it's a little bit more random. So soaring flight at the moment is a lot more fun with ridge lift than with thermal lift. We've got the standard tablet plug-in here, and simply by using the OpenStreetMap we've got a very good contour map here. I've made a little change to the coding for this tablet so that it shows the track, i.e. the course over ground, rather than the heading as it comes out of the box. That's a fairly easy change to do, and it's more useful for general aviation flying. Two other things about the varios. If I put this instrument here into total energy mode as well, you see they're both showing exactly the same at the moment. There's another function that varios can do, and that's called speed to fly. If I flick it over to the speed to fly mode, you can see STF now. It tells me that I need to accelerate a little bit. It's pointing down, so I'm going to lower the nose. And as I lower the nose, that needle comes up to 0. Now that tells me that I've got the best glide ratio at the moment. Whenever I'm at 0 on speed to fly, I've got the best glide ratio according to some settings that we've got in the instrument. That's the digital version of it. There's also, on this ring here, the analog version of it. So I can read off the needle here that my best speed to fly is about 50 knots, and that's what we've got just now. Now we can change both the outer dial here and the electronic version of it. We'll have a look at that on our final glide back to the airport. But at the moment, we're just cruising cross country. See, we're going into some lift. It's suggesting I slow down, so I'm going to pull the nose up. And you'll notice the tone is a little bit different to remind you that you're in speed to fly mode. So it's not showing me a rate of climb, it's giving me a speed suggestion. I don't want to go much slower than that though. I'll go back to total energy. And I'll flick this one back to netto. I always like to have one total energy instrument displayed. So we should be getting a little bit of lift off this. The wind's coming from the southwest, so we should be getting just a little bit, which is what we've got. It's a very shallow hill. What I really want to do is try and get over here and maybe there, and I think I've got the altitude to do so. What I don't want to do is fly over the ridge, because then I'll get into the sink, and that wouldn't be a good thing. We'll talk about the GPS navigator. Oh, that's a pretty good amount of lift there, only momentarily. We'll talk about the GPS navigator when we get a little bit more altitude. Let's concentrate on trying to climb up here. So it's a very nice modification to the K21 from Laminar. It's the instrument work was done by a user by the name of B21, and the 3D model enhancements were done by a user NHAdrian, the same chap that did the C152 mod. It's very nicely done, very nicely finished. I've had a lot of fun flying this in the past few days. So that constant tone tells me I'm in sync. But what I think we can do is maybe just have a little bit of an excursion over here, see if we can get any lift off the face of this hill. Now here's the first challenge, flying low level in the mountains. You don't have an obvious horizon when you're pointing at the hills. So this reinforces the fact that the aircraft is trimmed for a certain speed, and we can affect the speed with the pitch input. People get confused about power and pitch, and it's very easy for glider pilots to remember, because a glider pilot's got control of their speed without a motor, but they don't have any control of their rate of climb. So it's the excess power that provides the rate of climb, or the environment in this case. That's a good climb there. I think I've got enough just to hop over here. What I'm trying to do is to get to around about 4,200 feet. One of the objectives glider pilots aim for is their silver badge. There's 3 different aspects to the silver badge. There's the silver distance, which is a cross-country flight of 50 kilometers from one airfield to another. There's the silver duration, which is a 5-hour flight. And there's the silver height, which is a 1,000 meter gain. That's good. So I don't think we need to circle on or to turn on this ridge. When we're flying on a ridge, we're always going to make turns away from the ridge, never turn towards the ridge. That's a golden rule in glider flying. And if you encounter another aircraft coming the other way, then the aircraft with the ridge on their left has to turn away, because you always turn to the right to avoid a head-on collision, or to avoid a head-on aircraft. And you never turn towards the ridge. So if your right turn takes you away from the ridge, then you have to give way. Clear to the right. Now the other really good thing about this yaw string is most pilots will put their yaw string roughly where the horizon would be for level flight, so that you can do a lot more flying without looking inside. Remember that in gliding, you're generally in a pack of more than 3 or 4 aircraft. In a busy gliding, at a busy gliding site, there's a lot of aircraft around, so it's important to keep your eyes out at all times. That's why the Vario is audio, so you can fly without looking at the instruments. You basically get a feel for it. I think we've exhausted that hill. Let's go around. Oh, let's try and coordinate the turn and go around. So that adverse yaw is quite a thing for gliders. Those long wings and the very low amounts of airflow over the tail means gliders are especially prone to adverse yaw. When I roll the aircraft to the right, the wing on the left is producing more lift, and because it produces more lift, it produces more drag, and it pulls the nose of the aircraft to the left, and you can basically oscillate the aircraft. I'm not using the rudder at the moment, I'm just rolling from side to side, and you can see that yaw set up. So glider pilots really have to learn how to use the rudder. Well, I think we might be able to hop over to the bigger hill now. I can't remember the name of these hills. They're Scots Gaelic pronunciation as well, which Ben Croken perhaps? It seems to be quite a niche activity, gliding in X-Plane, but I think that's because there's not really that much information on it and there's not that many models, but it's really enjoyable. You also get a model of this aircraft with an electric motor, which means that you can fly along for a lot longer if that's your thing. Right, I think with the altitude, so I'll go back to speed to fly mode, I'll flick this one over to total energy, and lower the nose until that needle gets to 0. Now whilst we're running across here, I'll show you the McCready setting. See the m(c) on there, on the speed to fly. I can change the McCready setting. Now this is basically how well you expect the next thermal or the next bit of lift to perform. So if you're in a day where it's really strong thermals, then you would set your McCready value to 3. This would say that my average lift would be 3 knots up, maybe 5 knots up. And that means that the speeds are adjusted accordingly to give you the best cross-country speed. The McCready setting is all about racing or cross-country tasks. It was suggesting I slow down there, so there's a bit of lift. I'll lower the nose again. Now this face here might be quite marginal. The wind's coming from the south, so this bit here I don't think is going to work. I'll keep running towards the tree line there and see how it goes. Whilst we're here as well, note the altitude here. This distance, 9.2 miles, is to a finish waypoint. It's a little island just off the airport at Oban. This calculation is saying at this current speed, if I was to turn around and fly back with no wind influence really, with no consideration for the headwind, I'd get there at 200 feet, which is probably a little bit on the low side. And there's other waypoints. It just loads a standard X-Plane FMS. And if I look at one of the other waypoints, which is closer, I'll get there a little bit higher. So it's very good for cross-country tasks. So although I'm quite close to the terrain, it says here I'm only 500 feet above, it looks a lot closer. We can always escape by turning out to the right there. We should be getting some lift, so I'm going to go from speed to fly back into the netto mode. There, nearly. We got a little bit of lift. See if we can turn in again. As a general rule, the lower you are to the ground, the closer up the hill you need to be. Also, X-Plane's trees are really quite large, very tall trees. We're still going up, we're just not going up quickly enough for the Vario to kick in all the time. There, that's a fairly good climb now. Hopefully we'll be able to get up there in a few passes. As I said, it's a fairly niche activity, but there's a group on the xplane.org website. There's a forum section on there where people post tasks. You basically set the conditions up as the task designer intends. You load the FMS file into the aircraft, and then you try and post your times, and basically just go exploring in a glider. You've done all this work on the ortho photo. It's nice to explore it. So I've been climbing quite well. I'm just going to trim the nose back. I don't want to fly at 50 knots if we're in lift. If I click over to speed to fly momentarily, you can hear that it's still giving me a climb. So that's a very positive indication that we're in lift. I'm already back at the slowest speed I really want to fly at. And I'm averaging 4 knots up, so 400 feet per minute up. Glider instruments are used in knots rather than feet per minute. I think it's simply because it's an easier way to calculate your ratio based on your airspeed and your rate of climb. And of course metric instruments are meters per second and kilometers. And metric's a lot more common in gliders because the various different awards are generally based on metric altitudes. Oh. So I don't think we'll make the leap across beyond this lake here. I think that would be a little bit risky at this altitude. We're still climbing nicely. And as I said, this video is just something a little bit fun, a little bit different, because as I said, there's not a lot of people have seen gliding in X-Plane, and with the addition of the winch add-on and this kind of mod with the proper gliding instrumentation, it's actually quite enjoyable, really enjoyable. I've done about 300 or 400 glider flights in reality. Not a lot of hours because I flew at an airfield that wasn't very good for soaring, very good for downhill trips in a glider. You see as we're climbing here that my finishing distance is improving dramatically. I would get 11 miles finishing at 700 feet. Obviously that's subject to change if you change the airspeed and the wind. I'm a bit low to go into this this little bowl here, but perhaps if I make one more loop back, we'll be able to go through that bowl the next time. I'm using a twist grip joystick for my rudder at the moment. That was a better turn there. So gliding in the UK is very accessible, it's very popular in the UK. As I mentioned in my previous video, it's not expensive, but it does take a lot of time. A trip to a gliding club isn't generally just turn up and fly, there's lots of other things to do. It's very much a team activity, it's a team sport. And you can learn a lot about stick and rudder flying from gliding. I think we're high enough just to hop over into this bowl here. And one of the good things about this sort of flying is if you do somebody else's task, if you look at one of the other tasks that people have set on the forum, then they tell you which ortho photo which ortho scenery you need. And you'll have this moment where you're just flying along, climbing quite happily, working quite hard, and then you come around a corner on the hillside and there's a beautiful view that you've never seen in X-Plane before. It's really good for exploring. And it's very satisfying as well. We're now up at 3,200 feet from having started at around about 1,300. When I started flying gliders, a winch launch would cost you around about £4, and for that £4 you would get anything in a club two-seater. You don't tend to take a two-seater away for a long time because there's usually a lot of student pilots for each aircraft, but you could get about half an hour's flying for £4 or £5 for the launch. Some clubs charge you airborne fees, so you pay per minute in the aircraft as well, but obviously if you own your own aircraft, it's not expensive at all. And low performance aircraft are not expensive to buy at all. You can get a glass fibre aircraft for less than £10,000, which is around about $15,000. More expensive than a car perhaps, but very satisfying. There's nothing quite like sitting here in this little canopy, soaring along in the silence. If you turn the audio vario off, that is. Try again. So with the low airspeeds that we're flying at and the winds, I find it very helpful to have two views that keep the instrument panel in view but look roughly in the direction we're flying rather than the direction we're pointing. If I click its outside view momentarily, you can see that the aircraft's crabbing quite a bit. $3,800, let's have one final push, see if we can get up to 4,200. This corner here feels like it should be working better than it is. Let's try and get a bit tighter in on the hill. You don't ever want to go over onto the downwind side of the ridge because there's a lot of sink over there. You might not be able to get back. But look on my digital vario now, my audio vario now. You can see that I'd get back to my finish line at about 2,000 feet, which is perfect. Oh, I went over the ridge. There we go, there's all that sink. That's better. And there's other programs you can get for your PC, things like XC-Soar, which is a dedicated glide computer. It's almost like ForeFlight for gliding. It'll record on the map where you found extra lift, where you found extra sink. It'll show you cross-country speed. It's fairly high-tech at the top levels of the sport. This is just a training glider. Its cross-country performance is okay, but it's not great. Oh, too far again. Oh, went through the sink there again. Better. Yep, too far. Having the contour map on the tablet is really helpful because trying to keep situation awareness in the sim is a lot harder than in real life. I'm sure I can get just that little bit higher here. Doesn't help that I keep flying into the sink. Let's try and stay in this. So I'll turn the aircraft through the wind, and then I'll roll the other way. and basically try and do figure eights tracking the same position. We've got a very low forward speed, so always turning through the wind means that you'll basically roughly hold the same position. 4,100, nearly there. I'm really just trying to gain 3,000 feet. Come on, altimeter, you can do it. Oh, so close. So glider pilots, when they're competing for badges or in competitions, they carry loggers these days. If I concentrate, I might just get this. There we go. And the logger basically senses the atmospheric pressure, allows the log examiner to note how high the aircraft got. 4,200, let's point it roughly for home. They can see from the log how far the aircraft got, how high the aircraft flew. It's generally got a GPS trace these days as well. In the old days, they used to have a mechanical barograph in the aircraft that would record the pressure on a drum plotter, and they used to have a camera mount on here with a standard film camera that you would take a picture of your turning point, because glider competitions have got turning points just like waypoints in any other sort of flying, and a turning point may be a bridge or a building or a town or something, and you would have to take a photograph of that turn point to make sure to prove to the competition organizer that you were there. But nowadays it's all done with GPS, and with the advent of mobile phone technology, the glider will downlink its position automatically, so you can have a virtual representation of the competition in real life. Excellent. So let's fly home. As I said, we've got this navigator here. It's showing a slight turn left indication, so let's do that until it centralizes. It's aware of the wind, so it's looking at the GPS track to that waypoint. But also, we're doing 40 knots and it's 10 miles away. That's going to take a long time. In fact, 30 knots across the ground. It's going to take 20 minutes to get back. But I'm going to get there at 2,300 feet. That's a little bit high. I don't need to be that high. So what I'm going to do is go to speed to fly mode. And I'm going to wind the McCready value up. And you'll see as I tell it I'm going to fly faster, my arrival altitude gets lower. So if I put that down to not below 1,500, let's try 4 initially, and then I'll just lower the nose and keep an eye on that finishing height. If your finishing height was the airfield, you could be down at 300 or 400 feet. Competitions have got different rules depending on how low you're allowed to finish at those turning points. It's still telling me to fly faster with its tone. Notice that I'm bleeding some height as we accelerate, but hopefully that will sort itself out. There we go. And we'll fly back towards Oban. The finishing point I've got set is this island here. And every time you get a little bit of lift, it suggests you slow down, and as you get into the sink, you can fly faster again. I'll flick this one back over to total energy, just for awareness. And I can do the same calculation on this instrument. I can set my McCready to 4, which is rotating knob till 4 is there, and it's suggesting that at the current speed I should be flying about 72, 73 knots. Based on reading the outside ring here, this is showing the same, and that's roughly where we are. So you've got the information available in analog and computer format. This instrument here is also a GPS logger in real life. It has the logging capability built into it. The other advantage of being in speed to fly mode is you don't have the sync tone when you're on speed. So the headwind's affecting us just a little bit. I want to try and keep it to about 1,500 feet and then I'll reduce it down to about 1,000 when I've got 5 miles to go. But actually, we're okay just now. It's all about understanding what the air is doing. On my final glide here, there's not much in the way of lift sources available, so I need to be sure that I'm going to get there. If my final glide was along a east-west ridge, then I could fly as fast as I want because I know I've got lift available should I need it. I'm just being a bit more conservative here. That's disappearing at quite a rate, so I'm just going to back the McCready to about 3.5 and slow down just a touch. And now it's about flying as precisely as you can, making sure the aircraft is correct in yaw, make sure your yaw is correct, and minimal control inputs. Trying to minimize drag. So some gliders carry water as well. It sounds a bit odd that you make the aircraft heavier, but by making it heavier, it's able to penetrate into wind better. Its performance, it gets the best glide ratio occurs at a higher speed if the aircraft is heavier. That means it's better for cross-country flying. A light aircraft, a very light glider, a wooden fabric aircraft, would be not very good for going cross-country. It'd really struggle into wind, but its minimum sink speed would be very good. So in very weak conditions, it'll be able to stay up. It just won't be able to go that far. Whereas racing gliders trade that sink capability for cross-country performance. And this is all the default X-Plane weather system. I really hope at some point they do look at introducing thermal cloud effects for thermals, because it would mean that thermal solar would be quite enjoyable as well. At the moment, if you encounter a thermal, as I said, it's all by chance, so it's not quite the same. It's good for bimbling around. So less than 5 miles to go now. Let's just increase the McCready setting until I get down to about 1,000 feet. Let's try somewhere around there. So it's predicting 1,100 feet over the finishing point. I'll lower the nose. And it's usually at this point that we run out of forward trim. That's the aircraft trimmed fully nose down. And obviously if we had to, if I was getting a bit low, if I was to wind that all the way back, I could save myself 500 feet quite easily. We're not going to have an issue here. So without an engine, approach control on the glider is done with the spoilers or the speed brakes. You fly a similar sort of pattern as a light aircraft would fly, maybe just a little bit closer in, and you're looking for two altitudes. You basically fly downwind. You're looking for your high key point and your low key point. High key point is around about 750 to 800 feet at the upwind end of the runway, and your low key point is around about 650 to 600 feet at the downwind end of the runway. Very much depends on the aircraft performance. Try and fly downwind without the speed brakes, and then rather than doing a square circuit, we kind of chop the corner off the base turn. If you're in an older glider, your view over the shoulder is very poor. This has got 2 seats, so obviously you can see over your shoulder, but on a small old single-seater, it's a bit more tricky. I'm just going to back the speed off a little bit here. And obviously overflying the launch site would be frowned upon in reality. But you can see how we use the speed to fly function to make the most amount of use of the altitude that we have. We could arrive here 1,000 feet higher, but it would have taken a lot longer to come back here. We'd have been flying at half the speed. Remember, the headwind is really important at low airspeed. If I've got 20 knots of headwind and I'm flying at 40 knots, I'm only making 20 knots headway. But that 20 knots headwind flying at 60 knots, I'm making 40 knots headway. So twice as fast for the 20 knot gain. Into wind you fly faster, with a tailwind you fly slower. And that's what the polar curve is all about. So I talked about sectors. If this was a glider finishing point, there would be a semicircular sector over the island, or a line over the island that we'd have to cross. If it was a turning point, there would be a sector that we had to fly through. But here we are. By following the speed to fly approximately, we're overhead the little island at 1,000 feet. So there's a little bit of science in this as well. But it's very much hands on the stick kind of flying. Excellent. I'll call that the finish line. A little bit of climb to get the airspeed back, and then we'll turn around. And we'll try and join downwind right hand. Gliders accelerate to land. We fly very, very slowly when we're looking at soaring conditions. 42, 43 knots. But I want to be 55 to 60 knots downwind. Simply because as those spoilers come out, it's stopping a lot of that wing from producing lift. I'm going to turn that vario off now. We'll go back to total energy and netto on that side. So, tend to accelerate to land. That looks like good spacing, so let's roll onto the downwind. A touch on the high side, but not a problem. You'll see how effective those spoilers can be. There we go, 100 feet high at the high key point. Lower the nose to accelerate. Downwind checks on a glider are straightforward. Water, there's none on board, nothing to dump. Undercarriage is fixed on this aircraft. Landing area, it's selected. We're going to land on the runway, aiming for the numbers. And flaps, no flaps. Water, undercarriage, landing area, flaps. Straightforward. Also, you wouldn't actually fly over gliders on the launch point. That would be a bad thing. But we don't really have much choice with this scenery here. There's our low key point. Again, a little bit on the high side, so I'll keep it wide, 750 feet. We'll turn onto that 45-degree sector, that 45-degree cut between downwind and base. And we're going to keep in mind that when we do our final, we are pointing into wind again. And that has a dramatic effect on aircraft performance. This aircraft is fairly slippery. It goes quite well. Here come the spoilers. Final turn. Spoilers are out. And then just adjust the spoilers to keep the landing position in the same part on the windscreen. So if the landing point is going up the windscreen, you're descending too quickly, as we are at the moment. So just adjusting it. And the wheel brake is on full speed brake extension, so you don't want to land with full speed brake. There we go, brakes. And we've stopped. Simple as that. Turn off the instruments. I'll make sure that if I was using the logger, it's saved. I'm actually using a plugin for logging called GPX Log here, so I can stop that. Turn off the avionics, battery, open the canopy. And there we go. That's a little bit of gliding in the ASK21. I'll put links to everything that I've used in the video description. Hope you enjoyed the glider flight. I would urge you, if you've not done this in X-Plane, to give it a go. because it's enjoyable, it's simple, and you'll learn a lot about stick and rudder flying. If you find that you get airborne in X-Plane having programmed the FMC and flicked a lot of switches to get the aircraft going, get to about 500 feet and put the autopilot on, then this will give you a very accessible way to learn how to fly the aircraft. It really focuses on pitch for control of the speed and making sure you've got that yaw controlled as well. The extra challenge of dealing with the weather conditions and soaring just adds to the enjoyment. So let's have a look at analysing the GPX trace we got from the glider flight. I'm just going to drag this into Google Earth Pro, and I'm going to create KML line strings. Having done that, it's going to present the whole flight. Fairly straightforward. We can zoom in. Make sure that you don't adjust the track to altitude. Don't adjust it to the ground. And we can see that we've got a three-dimensional profile of our flight. If I open this up, I go into tracks and I go to the path, I can do properties on the path, go to altitude and extend the path to the ground. And then I can change the opacity to, let's say, 50%, make it a reasonable color, maybe 40%. There we go. And we've got a fairly nice pictorial reference. I think I might be able to turn off the, let's just go for filled, that's probably going to look nicer. There we go. You can click on any of these data points. This is captured by GPX Log. There's probably other plugins that will do the same thing. And you can see basically how we conducted the flight. You can see how we did some position keeping here in the final stages, the figure 8 there. You can see the cross-country section of it there, another little bit of height gain. And you can see when we came across onto the hill, we came back, we thought, well, I want to go into this bowl here, but I need to gain a little bit more height. And we get into the hole, the bowl. Finally, you can see that we ran over the ridgeline, got into the sink there. Can I pan it around? There we go. We got into the sink as we went over the ridgeline, and finally a little bit of station keeping as we got the final few feet of altitude. If we zoom out, we can see the final descent. It's fairly straight. It's what we're looking for in the final descent, or the final glide. See if I can pan it around. There we go. Fairly straight. We can see from the profile when we change speed. But most importantly, we can also look at the elevation profile. If I right click on the path, I can do show elevation profile. And that gets me this lovely view here. Make sure that I've got the elevation turned on. And we can see that from the point I left the winch launch, I established a low point here of 330 meters. And my high point, what's that? That is a gain of 1,200 meters, 1,284, 1,301. So there's the peak gain that we had in that. We can see the final glide and the little pull up I did over the finish line, and that would be basically the start of the gliding task to the end of the gliding task. Really useful for analysing it, and if you're interested in optimising your gliding performance, it's a very useful tool to have. So thanks very much for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you've not tried gliding in X-Plane, I really hope you give it a go.